Mental illness is real and should be taken seriously. Social injustices are real and should be taken seriously. But what about people who are woke? In today's episode, I'm going to outline whether or not wokeism should be considered a mental disorder. Fasten your seatbelts and let's start this exploration. Initially, the meaning of woke referred to an individual becoming more aware and addressing various social injustices, such as anything related to biases, discrimination, and double standards. But the term woke has evolved into a concept that is despised by many. Why? Well, because over time, people started using woke with a different slant as a weapon. They assigned this term to themselves or someone they know to increase their confidence and to validate themselves on the basis of being on a higher moral ground by standing up for what they believe in as they are fighting for a better world. But it has come to a point where anyone who disagrees with them is viewed as non-woke. So differing opinions, regardless of whether or not the arguments are rational, are disregarded as non-woke and they're not tolerated. Now, the term woke culture has evolved to include a whole bunch of negative adjectives, such as close-minded, cancel culture, groupthink, ideological polarization, virtue signaling, identity politics, victim mentality, and the list goes on. This has become part of the evolved definition of wokeism. So what's the definition of a mental illness then? According to the American Psychiatric Association, mental illness involves health conditions that involve changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of these. They can be associated with distress and or problems functioning in social work or family activities. Now, in applying this mental health or this mental illness definition to wokeism is to consider critical social justice theory. Advocates of this theory look to identify an enemy and then project their own intolerance onto them. So people fit in either the oppressed or oppressor category. Now, by contrast, relationship coaches and counselors often encourage a very different approach to disagreement, one that's rooted in humility. So it would appear initially that this type of rigid and often aggressive thinking from the woke, as well as the presence of significant distress and social functioning, fits under the mental illness definition. Second point, wokeism encourages an us against them mentality, and any disagreement isn't a mere difference of opinion, but used as reason to make accusations by mislabeling their opposition as racist, sexist, homophobic, and so on. Now, the argument could be made that, as with other belief systems taken to the extreme, excessive preoccupation with social justice and identity issues can lead to obsessive thinking and distress, thus impairing someone's functioning, causing significant emotional distress, thus aligning with the definition of mental illness. Third point, in wokeism, individual identities shift from each person having unique characteristics to a group identity with race and sex at the forefront. But according to the American Psychological Association, identity is defined by an individual sense of self, defined by a set of physical, psychological, and interpersonal characteristics that is not wholly shared with any other person. So it would appear that the woke's definition of identity signifies an unhealthy change in not only thinking, but in social functioning, again aligning with that mental illness definition. Fourth point, the perspective of wokeism tends to have an external focus. So, for example, if I'm a woke person and something bad happens to me or someone like me, I look at outsiders, the role they played, and then I pronounce loudly what they should do, rather than examine if I played a part in any way. So blaming other people or the non-woke system results in insults, frustration, anger, resentment, disappointment, thus often leading to a chronically negative mood. This lack of emotional regulation can also lead to group entitlement. In the field of psychology, taking ownership and responsibility for your actions is an important part of each individual's development. This involves empathy, humility, and growth. So the wokeism's victim mentality is in direct contrast to taking personal accountability, adding on to the argument that wokeism should be considered a mental illness. Fifth part, I'm just going to make a bunch of observations lending wokeism to a mental illness. And I'm going to be beginning with Dr. Aaron Beck. Now, he is known as the father of cognitive behavioral therapy and one of the world's leading researchers in psychopathology. He developed a list of cognitive distortions that fit with the woke: all or nothing thinking, discounting the positive, emotional reasoning, labeling, overgeneralization, polarized thinking, and so on. The woke's particular ideological lens can exacerbate anxiety, anger, and frustration, which only hinders dialogue and encourages division. Another aspect is social isolation. Extreme woke ideologies can lend to increased socialization as these individuals distance themselves from those who do not share their beliefs, or they use social justice issues as a basis for condemning and canceling others, leading to a lack of meaningful social connections, thus impacting their mental well-being. Another factor is their impact on the self-esteem. Now, one could say that wokeism may inadvertently foster feelings of helplessness and low self-esteem among individuals who feel that they're unable to meet the expectations of ideological purity, or they struggle to fully understand complex social issues. There's also something called confirmation bias and dogmatism. So woke beliefs tend to discourage critical thinking or openness to alternative viewpoints, thus hindering being able to engage in constructive dialogue. Now, I mentioned the emotions earlier, this heightened emotional reactivity. So being woke often involves strong emotional reactions to social issues. It could be anger, it could be guilt, it could be shame. So it could be argued that this excessive emotional reactivity and a focus on perceived injustices could lead to psychological distress and interfere with daily functioning. One last point is impaired coping mechanisms. So an extreme preoccupation with social justice issues may lead to avoidance of other important aspects of life, causing neglect of personal well-being and the prevention of developing healthy coping mechanisms. So if you got value out of today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss any of my future videos of free strategies. I also have another video I want you to watch. It's called The #1 Underlying Cause of Wokeism. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please comment below. Until next time, I'm the Iron Therapist, Lesley Timbol, reminding you to keep your mental game on.